Hello and welcome back to Global with me, Tim Wilcox. Health officials in the United States have warned that the current measles outbreak is still spreading quickly. The outbreak began at the Disneyland amusement park in California in December. Well, this highly contagious disease was officially eradicated in the United States 15 years ago, but declining vaccination rates over the past 2 decades have led to measles steadily reappearing in one of the world's wealthiest countries. The number of cases this year has risen to 121. Almost all of them are connected to the Disneyland outbreak. Until recently, it was unusual to see more than 100 cases for a whole year. This time, the outbreak has already spread to at least 14 US states, and most of measles symptoms clear within a fortnight. But in some cases, serious complications may arise. Sarah Clough contracted measles when she was 5 years old. The illness left her brain damaged and partially deaf and blind.
Her whole body, literally her whole body was smothered with measles. So badly that it did attack her brain. She was in a coma for 8 weeks. At death's door for 8 weeks, literally.
Sarah Clough's the story. Well, we can speak to one of the people behind Vaccine Knowledge Project, who produced the video we've just seen, Andrew Pollard, Professor of Paediatric Infection and Immunity at the University of Oxford and Director of the Oxford Vaccine Group. He joins us now from our studio in central London. Historically, we know how many people measles killed. Why is it coming back, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it's really very interesting when you look at how far we've come in reducing measles in recent decades. If you go back to the late 1990s, in the whole world, there are about 1 million cases of measles which ended in death. So 1 million deaths from this one virus every year. And as a result of the introduction of vaccine all over the developed world and now in almost all developing countries, that number of deaths is down to less than 200,000. So we have, in context, we have had an amazing impact against this terrible disease. But what's happened recently in the developed countries, where we've actually had vaccine programs since, in some places, since the 1960s, we've got used to a life without measles. And I think we've forgotten just how serious this disease can be if it is allowed to take hold again in our society.
So is it complacency? Because, you know, maybe just explain for our viewers the whole herd immunity principle, because you need a certain percentage, don't you, of any society to actually have this, to be able to prevent it spreading.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think it's entirely complacency. There's a number of different reasons why people are not vaccinated. I'll come on to herd immunity in a moment, but one of the main reasons when we go and look at the uptake of vaccines in general is access to vaccines, that being able to easily get your shot and for it to be readily available, particularly if you're in an isolated community, if you're trying to manage a number of small children, to get them to be vaccinated. It's one of the most important reasons. There are some people who are uncertain and need advice about the safety, and there's a tiny proportion of people who are very much against vaccination, but that's a much smaller proportion in most communities than is actually portrayed in the way that things come across, particularly with the media reporting. The biggest problem is just providing the information to parents who haven't yet made up their mind, and also to ensure that there's good access for everyone to get vaccinated. Your point about herd immunity very much depends on how infectious the germ is we're dealing with. With measles, it's incredibly infectious. We actually have to have over 95% of people in the population vaccinated in order for the virus not to be able to spread when it's introduced. And so that was the situation if you go back to the 1990s in the UK or in the US, where more than 95% of people in the population were either vaccinated or older, like me, who had had measles as a child. And whenever there was an introduction of the virus into the country, it couldn't spread because it immediately, when it tried to transmit, met someone who was already immune, and it couldn't cause disease in them, and so therefore it couldn't spread to anyone else.
Just briefly, I mean, how much of a problem, I mean, how much of a problem was the fact that there was this controversy over the MMR, and has that had a sort of an international impact as well?
So the MMR had an enormous impact in this country, without any doubt. But we've redressed the balance with that. We have now most children are receiving the vaccine. So we're really catching up with that problem. There are still some segments of the population who missed vaccination in the late 90s and early 2000s, and we saw the measles outbreak a couple of years ago in South Wales, which was a direct result of that. I am worried that we still have some pockets of people around England who weren't vaccinated at that time, and so there is still some risk for us of that. In the US, it's a very similar story.
OK, thank you, Andrew Pollard. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. You're watching Global